Welcome back, distinguished guests of ladies and gentlemen. It is always lovely to say hello to you after each session now and then. For now, we welcome to the session on transforming parliaments for a better future. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our distinguished speakers and panelists, and they are His Excellency Sabar Chowdhury, President of Inter-Parliamentary Union. Also, Her Excellency Gabriela Rivadeneira, President of the National Assembly of Ecuador, Vice President of the Parliament of Latin America in the Caribbean, Parlatino. Her Excellency Maria Lohela, Speaker of the Parliament from Finland. Also, Her Excellency Leon Theodore John, Speaker of the House of Assembly of St. Lucia. Her Excellency Esther Diaz Dlamini, Deputy Speaker of the House of Assembly of Swaziland. Her Excellency Agja Tajyevna Nurberdieva, Speaker of the Parliament Mejlis from Turkmenistan. Also, ladies and gentlemen, welcome with us as well, Her Excellency Uhud Al-Rumi, Minister of State for Happiness in the United Arab Emirates. And last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, your discussion leader for the panel is Miss Mary Hanafin, former minister in Ireland. And with all introductions aside, ladies and gentlemen, let us watch a short video on what this session is all about. Ladies and gentlemen, it will always give me pleasure to say this. Miss Mary Hanafin, the stage is yours.
Good evening, everybody. Dis Muriyiv, Agus Toffoil Chiroiv in my native language. You're very welcome. Thank you for staying this late in the afternoon. I have spent 14 years as a Member of Parliament where the Speaker would tell me when I could speak and when I was to stop. And now it's my turn. So it's a wonderful opportunity. But we've had two magnificent days here talking about the mega trends, the new challenges that face us all, and I think we probably all have been frightened by the scale at which change is happening. So we know what the issues are. What we're going to look at in this session is how parliaments can adapt, how parliaments can transform and change to deal with all of these future issues. We're all familiar with parliaments that react to events. All of our parliaments do it. We might have statements on climate change without actually initiating any change. We might pass a motion calling on the government to invest more in technological education. We might do reports on how far we have become advanced in gender equality, or perhaps how far we have not come. Or indeed, our parliaments might pass votes of sympathy on terrorist attacks. All of our parliaments react. What we want to look at is to see how can our parliaments be leaders. And what makes us different from government is the fact that we get our authority from the citizens, and we relate directly to our constituents. Our committees can, in fact, take a broader view, and because, even though we are all politicians, we have maybe multi-party and different political perspectives represented, we can have those voices heard in a parliament that isn't heard in a government. And of course, parliaments can initiate and pass legislation. So that can make our parliaments leaders. What we're going to look at here is examples of how our parliaments can transform themselves, how they can be the leaders of engaging with our citizens, how we can have examples of best practice. We heard earlier of a Committee of the Future in Finland. We heard of Namibia, where they have structures which help parents, where they meet in the mornings. What new structures do we need? What language are we using that's gender sensitive? What examples can we take from that and best practice? But more particularly, what we are trying to do is to move from the local, from the citizen engagement through our national parliaments on international cooperation through the Interparliamentary Union, through the EU, through the Latin American Association and organizations, through our work in the OECD, and through all of that, to be able to achieve the 17 goals for sustainable development of Agenda 2030. Our distinguished panel today are going to give us their best practice, some examples of how they are transforming, not to talk about what the issues are, but as to how we can tackle them. I will start with my great pleasure to invite President of the IPU, Mr. Chowdhury, to address us. Your Excellency.
Thank you so very much. Let me start off, if I may, by just trying to lay out in front of you what the challenges for parliaments today are. The challenges today are very different from the challenges of yesterday. Parliaments have to deal with subjects which are complex, which are technical, which are global in nature. And if you just look at the last slide that Mary had up, the Sustainable Development Goal agenda, no less than 17 targets, rather 17 goals, 169 targets, and about 300 indicators. So how does a parliamentarian, when he has got enough on his plate in terms of local issues, in terms of servicing his constituents, how do they then cope with this enormity of responsibilities? It is just no longer the local agenda. We live in a world where the distinction between the global, the regional, and the national is being increasingly blurred. What is national is at the same time regional and at the same time global. So this is a huge ask of parliaments. Before we can be leaders, we really have to know the subjects. And I think the first question that confronts us is that of capacity. Capacity of ourselves as individuals and capacity of the institution of parliament that we represent. I think this is going to be fundamental, because unless our capacities match the needs, there is always going to be a disconnect between the two. So from the IPU, one of the initiatives that we have taken is how can we enhance the capacity of individual parliamentarians and also the institution of parliament. We have provided, in concert with the UNDP, given the growing relationship that we have between the IPU and the UN, a self-assessment toolkit. I emphasize the word self because when you're talking about parliaments, you talk about sovereign rights. It is important that the parliament itself does this assessment. We don't want an outside body to come and tell us how we should be organizing the work of the parliament. And this toolkit is essentially a set of questions that each parliament can ask of itself. So this is internal benchmarking, trying to identify where the gaps are so that we can thereafter address those gaps. So it is really trying to make parliaments equipped, trying to make parliaments competent to discuss the great issues of the day. I think this is the first point where I would start off. It is also quite evident that the new Sustainable Development Goal agenda is not going to be fulfilled only by governments or only by parliaments. So we need a new type of partnership, a partnership that is within governments, between parliaments and governments, between parliaments, private sector, the civil society organizations. So we're looking at a new coalition of partnership. And I think that is, again, what a parliament has to do. You were quite right in pointing out that our role is quite different from, let us say, civil society, the private sector, in that we are mandated by our constitution to act on behalf of the people. So I think this is now a huge responsibility that we have amongst us. The other point that I would bring out is, in a democracy, it's quite natural to have a relationship which is not always harmonious with the government. When you have a responsibility of oversight, when you are trying to scrutinize actions of the executive of the government, there will always be some tension, because we never like being told that we are wrong or that we should be doing something in a different manner. But when it comes to the new development agenda, when it comes to responding to the megatrends, whether they be social, political, economic, or environment, I think you're looking at a new form of partnership between the executive and the legislature. So those are three brief points that I want to reference at this stage. And then once we have heard all of the other distinguished panelists, we can go more into that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Our first lady speaker on this, I'd like to welcome Gabriela Rivadeneira from Ecuador.
Un saludo muy especial en esta tarde a todas y todos ustedes. Dar un saludo especial a nuestro compañero Saber, presidente de la UIP, y un saludo especial, cariñoso, de hermandad con nuestra querida compañera Amal. Gracias a Amal, a su gestión, por haber instalado justamente esta mesa en la que las presidentas de parlamentos del mundo podamos sentarnos a debatir los temas sustanciales de la participación política de las mujeres. Además, quiero aprovechar para felicitar y augurar muchísimos éxitos y más unión en paz por estos 45 años de aniversario de los Emiratos Árabes Unidos. Bueno, yo vengo y quiero comentarles algunas de las experiencias. Yo vengo de Ecuador, del ombligo del planeta, una tierra maravillosa, megadiversa, y que se ha planteado un cambio y una transformación sustancial de su sociedad. Y lo digo esto porque soy parte de esa transformación que hace 10 años empezó en nuestro país a través de un proyecto que ha sido denominado Revolución Ciudadana, y que ha planteado la incorporación de todos quienes fuimos excluidos de la participación política en nuestro país. Yo empecé mi participación política a los 19 años de edad, ya en una elección popular por la que fui electa concejala de mi cantón, y hoy son 4 años que he tenido la oportunidad de presidir por primera vez como mujer el Parlamento de mi país. Hemos sufrido y he sufrido, al igual que todas las mujeres que se encuentran aquí, diferentes etapas de discriminación por nuestra condición de ser mujer. Nuestra condición de género ha impedido muchas veces que nuestra voz y nuestro accionar sea considerado mucho más en un espacio como el Parlamento, que por sí tiene una historia de participación de hombres y hombres adultos. E irrumpir esa política como mujeres y como jóvenes ha traído también sus dificultades. Pero me alegra saber que no son dificultades que lo asume una sola persona, sino que somos miles de mujeres alrededor del mundo que durante décadas hemos promovido las transformaciones en nuestra participación política, y esa es la tarea que tenemos hoy, el de seguir promoviendo transformación a través de nuestra participación. ¿Cómo entonces tiene sentido nuestra participación? Y es en cuanto a marcar la diferencia en esa sociedad, en esas relaciones de poder hombre y mujer. ¿Cómo hacerlo? Con el pueblo y de la mano de nuestra ciudadanía, bien lo decía Mary cuando nos hacía la presentación. La única manera de construir una legislación que sea práctica, operativa, que sea eficiente, es trabajarla de la mano con la ciudadanía bajo las necesidades propias de cada sector ciudadano. Y fue ahí cuando nuestra transformación empezó con una nueva constitución que fue construida en el 2008 de la mano del 68% de los ecuatorianos que participamos en esa constitución de Montecristi. Fue ahí donde instauramos el mecanismo de paridad y alternancia obligatoria para la participación de mujeres en todas las instancias de representación y de designación. Ahí empezó nuestro proceso de visibilización, participación efectiva e incidencia política, la ruptura de esas relaciones de poder hombre y mujer que empezó por encargar a mujeres ministerios estratégicos del desarrollo del país, como el Ministerio de Economía, el Ministerio de Defensa, el Ministerio de Recursos Estratégicos No Renovables, también tenían esos rostros de mujer. Y en el Parlamento pasó algo muy positivo para nuestro país. A través de esa política de paridad y alternancia obligatoria, pasamos de un 8% de participación de mujeres en el 2006 al 42% de participación en el año 2013. No solamente de mujeres, cuyo parlamento es el único parlamento en el mundo que tiene 3 mujeres al frente de la administración legislativa, sino que somos 23% de jóvenes menores de 35 años quienes participamos también de la construcción legislativa. Pero ¿de dónde venimos? Venimos de las localidades, venimos desde las organizaciones sociales a poner la impronta de las luchas sociales para transformar los parlamentos, para que dejen de ser esas instancias lejanas de su desarrollo y pasen a ser los espacios donde la gente construye su legislación, viabilizado por sus legisladores electos democráticamente. Es ahí entonces donde comprendemos que los parlamentos generan las bases de las sociedades que queremos. Si queremos una sociedad que privilegie el capital por sobre el ser humano, la legislación visualizará entonces ese beneficio para el capital y dejará a un lado el desarrollo del ser humano. Parte de la transformación también es comprender que los parlamentos tienen que legislar para la gente, donde la gente es el objetivo central de todo desarrollo. Nosotros hemos denominado ese modelo de desarrollo socialismo del buen vivir. Entonces, para nosotros la legislación es la herramienta para transformar nuestra sociedad. Bajo esa premisa, estos 4 años hemos aprobado más de 50 leyes para transformar nuestro país. Entonces, aquí es necesaria la pregunta, ¿por qué transformar los parlamentos y dónde esa transformación incorpore decididamente a las mujeres dentro de la generación legislativa? Y esta pregunta tiene una respuesta mucho más simple de lo que imaginamos. Nuestra historia ha generado, a través de las tareas de cuidado y de la reproducción, que nos ha dado a las mujeres el instinto de sobrevivencia, la capacidad de administrar para que lo poco que tenemos alcance para el bienestar de todos los miembros de la familia. Ese instinto genera protección y eso se traduce en la capacidad de indignación frente al dolor del otro y sobre todo frente a las necesidades del otro. Entonces aquí vemos por qué las mujeres debemos participar para esas transformaciones y para un futuro mejor. Debemos participar porque legislamos para evitar que nuestros cuerpos sean mercantilizados. Legislamos para tipificar como delito el femicidio y empezar con la erradicación de todo tipo de violencia física, psicológica, sexual, patrimonial, simbólica, obstétrica, con entrega total por tan difícil que sea y que parezca. Legislamos para cerrar brechas de desigualdad, empezando por garantizar la educación para todas y para todos por igual. Legislamos para proteger el interés superior de niños y niñas como apuesta a mejores sociedades. Legislamos para que las mujeres campesinas tengan agua, tierra y semilla para garantizar soberanía alimentaria. Legislamos para cambiar del discurso político de la violencia sexista, machista, xenófoba, al mensaje de construcción de sociedades de paz. Entonces ya sabemos por qué tenemos las mujeres que seguir participando en la política y por qué bajo nuestra dirección está la incorporación no solo de más mujeres, sino de más jóvenes que trabajen por la apuesta de las transformaciones de sociedades. Si somos el 50% de la población en el mundo, entonces tenemos que conseguir que ese 50% sea el espacio de la representación de las mujeres, porque además somos madres del 50% restante de esa población. ¿Cómo transformar nuestros parlamentos? Simple, más participación de mujeres para transformar nuestras sociedades a sociedades de cultura de paz. Gracias.
You can now see how Gabriela is the most voted for politician in Ecuador ever. Another young speaker, which we're delighted to welcome, is Her Excellency Maria Lohela from Finland, and we've already heard about your committee for the future, so we look forward to hearing more.
So in order to, Madam Chair, in order to answer the question about how to transform parliaments for a better future, there are probably dozens, if not hundreds, ideas or examples or things that we've already tried out and haven't worked. But considering from my personal point of view, I've been the speaker for a year and a half now. So when I thought about this topic, what are the things that I could do in person for my parliament, things that we could change for the better in the future, or things that we already have but could somehow alter to make them more effective, I came down to 3 points. One of them is something that all of us can do, and it is to look into the mirror in the morning before you go to work and ask yourself if you are doing what you set out to do as a parliamentarian. Are you doing the things that you told people that you were going to do? Are you trying to change the things that you promised to change? I think we're seeing a great deal of distrust towards politicians. I think it's a universal problem, and I think people are feeling, especially now that the economy has been hit in many places, I think people are seeing that politicians are not doing what they were saying to do. So I think we should level down our promises and also our expectations and try to be more realistic in a difficult situation. Then my second point, or or an example from the Parliament of Finland, is what we did a few years ago. We started to use, we passed a law about citizens' initiative. And that was in order to increase people's interest towards politics and their feeling of participating in politics. So citizens' initiative means that anybody who is of 18 years of age, a Finnish citizen, can start an initiative and collect, either in paper or online, 50,000 signatures in order for the Parliament to process that initiative. So within 4 years, we've actually had 500 initiatives, but only 13 have reached that goal of 50,000 signatures. But we've all handled them in the Parliament. And actually, at the moment, we just got a new one in. It's about changing or doing a major reform in our pension system. And whenever we're going to start debating that in the Parliament, I expect it to be very, very interesting talk. So that's one concrete example of how to increase citizen participation. And then my third point relates to opposition. Now, I do realize that in the world there are different ways of running parliaments. But in the Nordic countries and also elsewhere in the world, there is a very clear division in the parliament. You know, there are the parties that represent the government, and then there are the parties that are in the opposition. As a speaker, even though I do represent a government party myself, when I look at our members of parliament talk, I can almost feel each of their passion. They truly believe in what they say, and they truly care about the ideas that they want to put forward. And I think all of them are just as important. It doesn't matter whether you agree or not, but everybody should be respected for their opinions. So what we've done, one concrete thing that we've done to facilitate the work of the opposition parties in the parliament is Finland, is that we've hired economists who only or mainly serve the opposition parties. They provide them with all sorts of data and calculations for their budget suggestions, etc. So that's something that they will get some professional help in their work. That's I think that's it. Those were the 3 points I wanted to bring up to this discussion.
Thank you very much, Maria. And just as an immediate follow-on, can I ask, do the parliamentarians from the opposition cooperate and work with the parliamentarians from a government party on any really non-political issues?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, we have the government politicians and opposition members of parliament. They cooperate quite a lot. And for example, in comparison to Sweden, our neighboring country, in Sweden, opposition members of parliament, I think they cannot be chairing any committees, whereas in Finland, it doesn't matter whether you're in an opposition or government, you can still chair committees. So there are all sorts of places where they can do important work.
Thank you very much, Maria. Our next speaker, Her Excellency. Thank you. Our next speaker from the beautiful St. Lucia, Her Excellency Leon Theodore John, is not only the Speaker of the Assembly, but she's a previous President of the Senate. So she has a lot of experience to offer us, and I know she's an expert and specialised in gender equality. You're very welcome, Leon.
Her Excellency, His Excellency Sabah Chaudhry, President of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, His Excellency Martin Chongon, Secretary General of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, Her Excellency Dr. Amal Al-Kabasi, President of the Federal National Council of the United Arab Emirates, distinguished guests, distinguished speakers of our various parliaments, good afternoon. It is indeed an honor and privilege to be given the opportunity to address this gathering. For me, words cannot express the pride that I feel to be part of this important first in Abu Dhabi, Global Summit of Women Speakers of Parliament. Unlike many of the speakers before me, my parliament is relatively new in that we recently held general elections on 6 June this year. As a consequence, I have not had the opportunity to achieve as much as my esteemed colleagues. However, I hasten to give my solemn pledge to take the bold step and forge ahead in my country and be the pioneer of what I am about to present. We women have fought long and hard to get our voices heard in a world in which we form no less than 50% of its population. Women being given instructive viewpoints and inventive approaches to governance, yet we are dramatically underrepresented in political leadership. Of significance also is the unique character of sensitivity as caregivers and nurturers, as you heard from my esteemed colleague from Ecuador. We bring to the table, and what makes us better poised to harness the strength of our fellow male parliamentarians to achieve our goals. Our very presence at this Global Summit of Women Speakers of Parliament here in Abu Dhabi authenticates the progress we have made and what we have attained thus far. Irrespective of those strides that we have made, we remain marginalized and underrepresented at the highest decision-making levels of our society. And this must change. The process of change of necessity means that we must do all in our power to increase the representation of women at both socioeconomic and legislative levels of our societies. It then therefore begs the question, what is the most effective and swiftest way of achieving this increase? Let us examine the quota system. Quotas are empirically the most effective approach to achieving a more equitable gender balance at the leadership levels of our society, and which includes our parliaments. The boldest strides towards equal representation of men and women took place in elections where quotas, whether they be legislative or voluntary in nature, had been introduced. And let us examine the voluntary quota system. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, in 1996, introduced the all-women shortlist, where, as leader of the Labour Party, the goal was to have at least 100 women elected to the House of Commons. This he achieved by ensuring that qualified and capable, brothers and sisters, qualified and capable women stood in 50% of all perceived sure seats for the Labour Party. On May 1st, 1997, 120 women were elected to the House of Commons of the United Kingdom, based on the bold stunts of Tony Blair. The results of the 1997 elections in the UK revealed that, for the first time, women elected to the House of Commons comprised an 18.2% of the House, a stark increase from what pertained previously. Closer to home and in the Caribbean region, where I live, Trinidad and Tobago agreed to implement the voluntary quota system as per the recommendations of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, which advocates that 30% of all candidates standing for elections should be women. Today, following the 2015 general elections of Trinidad and Tobago, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association recommended goal was attained with a 30.5% female representation in its bicameral parliament. Brothers and sisters, while a voluntary quota system and political will can go a long way in bringing some measure of equity, I submit, and I am persuaded, that the legislative quota route is the most effective, fastest, and preferred means of achieving gender equality. The legislative quota system will circumvent cases of conservative and male-dominated leadership, party leadership, which has been posited as the main cultural obstacle to women's nominations and elections. Legislative quotas are often seen as stumbling blocks to these entrenched elites and force them to look for suitable women candidates. One very strong argument on the success of the legislative quota is that once women are elected, they serve as role models for other women and will also serve to encourage younger women to become interested in the business of governance. Further, Legislative quota provides the impetus for political parties to seriously embark on the process of finding suitable women candidates. Turning once again to my home region, the Caribbean, Guyana has a success story in that its election laws were amended in the year 2000, wherein a 30% quota for women was legislated. The IPU has 171 members and 11 associated members. Of those, 42 have established legislated quotas. From the Caribbean region, Guyana is one of that 42. I am also obligated to singular point out reference to Rwanda, which is currently the most successful with a representation of 57.5% women in its parliament. The argument that the implementation of a legislative quota system would probably lead to a long and perhaps non-exhaustive debate. However, I know that. There are those who will advance that the legislative quota system is positive discrimination. But nonetheless, it is still discrimination in a discriminatory nature. My counter-argument is that, honorable sisters, in that the imposition of a legislative quota system is not prejudicial at all. The better view is that it attempts to provide compensation for already existing system of inequality. I wish to restate the submit my position. It is that legislative quota system is currently the most effective and fastest means of ensuring a more equitable system of gender distribution for parliamentary representation. Let me conclude by quoting our host, Her Excellency Dr. Amal Al-Kobasi, who yesterday stated, "When we women work together, we can move mountains. But when we women join hands and work together with the men, we can move the world." My sisters, let us therefore leave here, committed and resolute, that upon our return to our respective parliaments, we will do all in our power to advance the agenda of achieving gender equality in our parliaments by a legislative quota system. And going further...
Mind, please. Sorry to interrupt.
I wish to humbly submit that by adopting legislative quota as one of the recommendations of this summit, we will ensure that we will in fact move the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to be interrupting such eminent speakers, but when I tap the glass, I'm not inviting you to join me for a drink. I'm suggesting you might take another minute to wrap up. As we move on, our next speaker, Her Excellency from Swaziland, Esther Dlamini, has the distinction of being the only woman elected by the people in Swaziland in the last elections. The only woman elected by the people. So we're particularly glad to have you with us. Thank you, Esther.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on the topic transforming parliaments for a better future, this presentation focuses on the role of parliaments in implementing Agenda 2030 and the need for parliaments to transform in order to address associated present and future challenges. We recognize that eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions, including extreme poverty, is the greatest global challenge and an indispensable requirement for sustainable development. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets demonstrate the scale and ambition of this new universal agenda, seeking to build on the Millennium Development Goals and complete what this did not achieve. The world over the next 15 years or so seeks to realize human rights of all and to achieve gender equality and the empowerment of all women, girls, and vulnerable groups. The area of women empowerment and representation has remained a challenge for most countries, including Swaziland. Following our last election in 2013, Swaziland hit rock bottom in women's representation in positions of power, particularly parliament. Only 18% of the current parliament is women. And most of the women parliamentarians were either nominated by the monarch or elected by the lower house through the quota system, and only one, being myself, that was directly elected by the people to parliament. This was at the time when the country was giving its last push for gender equality before 2015, in line with our international commitment towards gender equality, particularly the SADC Gender Protocol target of 50% women in all areas of decision making. With this kind of state of affairs, we appeal for support in coming up with a holistic approach to increasing women's participation in the public space in 2018 parliament elections and beyond. Sadly, it is not coming out very clearly as to why women are not voting each other into power. Some point to the patriarchal nature of Swazi society, while others argue that the country needs to adopt an enhanced quota system without the electioneering elected women into legislature to respectable figures, given that the majority of voters are women. This seeks to be solutions. Let me hasten to mention that the question remains as to what form will such a transformation take and how can we start it today. Undoubtedly, parliamentarians have a significant role to play in the implementation of Agenda 2030, and not only about this agenda, but also to broader sustainable development agenda. Those parliamentarians that have not transformed to e-parliament yet need to start in earnest. The use of information and communication technologies, ICT, to engage citizens is central in the transformative effect of making parliamentarians more transparent and accessible. Parliaments should address the issue of citizens' engagement and closing the feedback loop. How do we get citizens' voices, particularly women and children, to the table and make sure they are not being left behind? And how do we make sure that those left behind are engaged? The underrepresentation of women should be addressed by strengthening the avenues by which their participation in politics and government is encouraged. These avenues are equalization of education opportunities, quotas for female participation, legislative reforms to increase focus on issues concerning women and children, financing gender-responsive budget to equally and equitable take into account the need of men and women, among other avenues. Okay. At national level, all countries must develop as soon as possible, as practicable, national responses in the form of law and or policies to the overall implementation of this agenda. This can support the transition to the SDGs and build on existing planning instruments. Regular and inclusive reviews ought to be carried out and draw contribution from the people, civil society, the private sector, and other stakeholders. Regional follow-ups and reviews can provide useful opportunities for peer learning and sharing best practices and discussions and shared targets, including at the high-level political forums on sustainable development of the UN. A global level.
I'm sorry, Your Excellency, to interrupt, but I wonder if you could start to wrap up.
LPF will have a central role in overseeing a network of follow-up and review processes, working coherently with the General Assembly and other relevant organs and forums in accordance with existing mandates. This will facilitate sharing experiences, including lessons learned, and provide political leadership, guidance, and recommendations for follow-up. It will also promote a system-wide coherence and coordination of sustainable development policies, the same way it should ensure that the agenda remains relevant and ambitious.
Sorry, Madam Speaker, I'm sorry, I do ask you to complete. Thank you very much indeed. I really do apologise because we're under terrible time pressure, but it's a great pleasure, and thank you very much, Speaker Dlamini. Now to invite the only woman chair in East Asia, Her Excellency Acha Nurderbayeva, to come and speak to us. Thank you.
Так как у меня 4 минуты, поэтому я не буду читать текст, а скажу своими словами. Разрешите мне, дорогие мои подруги, сестры, дорогие братья, от имени моего президента Туркменистана Гурбанғұлы Бердімұхамедова поздравить с этим замечательным саммитом, с организацией этого саммита и пожелать успехов всем вам в вашей нелегкой, но благородной работе. Дорогие дамы и господа, я, наверное, сегодня скажу одно, что мы, женщины Туркменистана, наверное, самые счастливые женщины, потому что у нас в стране проблемы занятости женщин, организация наших женщин в самых высших эшелонах власти сегодня – это обычное дело. Наши женщины сегодня представляют и в парламенте, и являются вице-премьерами, и министрами, и редакторами газет. Сегодня со мной мои подруги. Со мной приехал министр, со мной приехала женщина, редактор журнала женского, республиканского. Со мной приехали депутаты парламента, которые являются руководителями профсоюзов и руководителями партийных организаций Союза промышленников и предпринимателей. То есть я хочу сказать, что у нас сегодня в парламенте из 125 депутатов 33 женщины. И это 26,4%. В прошлом созыве у нас было только 17%. Сегодня у нас уже около 27%. И я думаю, что в 2018 году, когда пройдут следующие выборы, у нас будет уже больше 30%. И это не предел, потому что женщины Туркменистана самые счастливые женщины. Почему? Да потому, что наши женщины сегодня имеют большие возможности в образовании. У нас в стране бесплатное среднее обязательное образование. Дети получают не только общеобразовательные предметы, но они еще получают знания нескольких языков. Наши дети говорят сразу на 3-4 языках по окончании школы. Высшее образование у нас бесплатное. Наши женщины, имеющие грудных детей, до 3 лет имеют право находиться в декретном отпуске. То есть наши женщины могут, находясь в декретном отпуске, получать пособие по уходу за ребенком. Но это время она имеет право, находясь в отпуске, за ней закрепляется ее рабочее место. Она может в любое время, и через год, и через 2, и через 3 выйти на свое рабочее место, и оно будет ее рабочим местом. Наши женщины имеют одинаковые равные права и равные возможности с мужчинами. Это закреплено в Конституции Туркменистана. В нашей Конституции главным богатством нашей страны является, главной ценностью является наш гражданин. И поэтому и женщины, и мужчины – это наша ценность. Но самая главная наша ценность – это наша молодежь, которому строить будущее. Какое будущее мы сегодня будем строить для молодежи? Естественно, здоровый образ жизни, духовное воспитание и, самое главное, прекрасное образование. И сегодня это воплощается в жизнь. Сегодня среди молодежи в Туркменистане мы за 10 лет искоренили такое негативное явление, как наркомания. В Туркменистане сегодня нет наркоманов среди молодежи. В Туркменистане сегодня только лишь около 7% курящих. У нас среди граждан Туркменистана пьющих маленький процент. То есть вы никогда в Ашхабаде, в Туркменистане на улице не увидите пьяного человека, потому что у нас есть прекрасное отношение к спиртному. То есть я хочу сказать, что люди знают, как себя вести в обществе. Но самое главное, я хочу сказать, что мы очень дружный народ. В Туркменистане живет более 40 различных национальностей, но все они дружат между собой. И украинцы, и русские, и азербайджанцы, и армяне, и многие другие национальности. И я хочу сегодня сказать, нас сегодня так много. Если раньше всего лишь вот мы говорим о том, что буквально 15 женщин было руководителей парламента, сегодня 52. Не это ли говорит о том, что мы сильное общество, мы развиваемся, мы идем вперед. И самое главное, не плакать стоять, а главное делать свое дело. Каждый должен на своем месте, именно в своем парламенте делать все возможное, чтобы нашим гражданам жилось лучше. Я хочу сказать, что у нас парламент очень активно сотрудничает с кабинетом министров. У нас самые теплые, добрые отношения. Мы, как законодатели, а не как исполнители, мы совместно, постоянно ведем совместную работу. И когда нам необходимо, чтобы какое-то решение было принято, всегда кабинет министров нам идет навстречу. И у нас в кабинете министров тоже есть женщины. Но это не значит, что остальные мужчины нам не помогают. Нам прекрасно помогают наши мужчины. И я их очень уважаю, потому что они к нам относятся не просто как к женщинам, а как действительно
Madam Speaker, I'm sorry, I must ask you to complete. Thank you, Madam Speaker, when you're ready to
людям,
finish.
которые делают благое дело. Я хочу вам всем пожелать счастья, здоровья, мира над головой. Пусть всегда будет мир во всем мире. Пусть дружба решает все наши проблемы. Только через диалог, только через дружбу мы можем решить все наши проблемы. Спасибо за внимание.
My sincere thanks, Madam Speaker, from Turkmenistan. In fact, you ended very well talking about happiness, because our next guest, Her Excellency Yahoud al-Rumi, is the Minister of State in the United Arab Emirates for happiness, which I think must be probably the most wonderful title that any minister has anywhere in the world. So, Minister, thank you for joining us today, but we would particularly like to hear about this wonderful position and what exactly is it that you do?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It really gives me great pleasure to be among you today to talk about the UAE approach to happiness. Happiness is not new for the United Arab Emirates. Our country was founded 45 years ago on the notion of happiness. And we truly believe in the UAE that the real work of the government is to create happiness. I was appointed in February 2016 as the Minister of State for Happiness, with the role of aligning public policy in order to make sure that we have happy, healthy, and positive society. So how do we define happiness from a government perspective? I think governments this is a paradigm shift for governments around the world, and governments need to reinvent themselves. Because the real work of the government is not just providing services or building hospitals or building schools. Governments need to ask themselves what is the ultimate objective behind everything they do. It is to create happiness, which is the end result or end goal for us as individuals and for nations. And you know, many countries around the world, they might use the word well-being or life satisfaction, but the UAE government chose the word happiness, which is straightforward, relates to the daily work of everyone. When I travel around the world, I get frequently asked, what are you trying to do in the UAE? Are you trying to regulate happiness? And my answer is, of course, no. We understand that happiness is a personal choice, but our work as a government is to work on the enabling environment, providing good health care, education services, sense of security, job opportunities, economic growth, and empower people, give them the opportunity to choose to be happy. If I take the example, for example, of the health services, why are we building hospitals? To provide healthcare services. Why are we doing that? For people to lead healthy lives. Why are we doing that? So people live happy lives. And the Ministry of Health provides healthcare services, access, quality, but does not regulate life and death. It's up to the people to live a healthy life, exercise, take care of themselves so they live long life. Happiness, when I talk about happiness, I'm not talking about the momentarily feelings. I'm talking about the long-term, authentic, sustainable happiness, which is the final outcome, the collective effort of all government entities. For me, all ministries or all departments are ministries of happiness because they provide services for the citizens, whether it's infrastructure, laws and regulations, education, services. The ultimate goal is to provide happiness for citizens and people. I think the future will be for happiness, and we'll see more governments and countries around the world talking about happiness, because GDP per capita is no more the only measure of a nation's success, because it is an activity measure. We need to look for other measures that looks after the welfare, and actually the UN asks their members to view happiness as the holistic approach to development. I traveled a lot this year because I wanted to see benchmarks. How can we bring happiness from just a development framework, make it operational, part of the daily work of the government? And this is what we're trying to do in the UAE. But then I said, why don't we create a platform for all countries interested? Because we receive weekly requests from countries around the world who would like to know what we're trying to do in the UAE. So we decided to create a platform where we bring all countries around the world so we can learn from each other. And we will host on 11th of February a dedicated day for advancing happiness towards a better and a happier world. And I would like to extend the invitation to all governments represented here today to join us in that dialogue, because happiness is not a national endeavor. It is a global endeavor towards a happier and a better world for all of us. Thank you.
Whereas on the one hand, I must apologise to my panel for cutting the session short. Could there be a better way to end than to talk about the promotion of happiness and the whole global endeavour of it? Thank you very much, Minister, for being with us and for sharing your thoughts with us. On behalf of every chairperson, every speaker, every participant in this conference, as this is the final session, may I, on behalf of everybody, thank Her Excellency Dr. Amal, all of the organisers of this conference, for such a wonderful experience, for giving us the opportunity to share our ideas, and particularly for your most generous hospitality. And we wish you and all that work with you, Dr. Amal, every continued happiness and good health and every success. To everybody here, thank you all very much indeed.
حضورنا الكريم من السيدات والسادة، نرجو منكم البقاء في القاعة. جلستنا الأخيرة بعد هذه الجلسة وستبدأ بعد قليل تحت عنوان إعلان أبو ظبي. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay by your seats. Our next and final session will be the Abu Dhabi Declaration. Please stay tuned. Thank you.